Metaphor Refantazio's archetype tree can be a little bit overwhelming, and choosing the best skill to inherit can become an afterthought because you're overloaded with so many options to choose from. I wanted to wait until I beat the game to make this video so I can give you the best choices possible, so here are my top 10 skills for you to inherit in Metaphor Refantazio. Now, these aren't going to be in any type of order, but I did attempt to limit myself to only the first and second evolution of a lineage, so that way I'm not recommending something in the third evolution and you're not going to be able to unlock it without a significant investment. All of these you're going to be able to get early game and you're going to be able to use them throughout your entire playthrough. But the first skill that I'm going to recommend you to inherit is going to be from the merchant archetype, and that's going to be its gold attack. Now, this is going to cost 500 of whatever the currency is called, but it's going to do weak physical almighty damage to one enemy and have a high chance of hitting a critical hit, which is going to give you that extra turn icon. Now, I haven't ran into any issues. I've ran this as an inherited ability on multiple classes at once, I think up to 3, sometimes 4, and I've never had an issue with running out of money, especially since I usually had the merchant archetype equipped to the main character, and with the passive, killing enemies in the overworld or stunning them is going to give you a small amount of money, so it's just never been an issue. And this is also going to help you cheese a lot of the early to mid game bosses. So I ran a heavy physical based team where I ran several different warriors, but I had the gold attack equipped to them as an inherited ability, and whenever I ran into something that repelled slash attacks, I would just go to this, which is going to be physical almighty, and it's also going to help you clear a lot of these dungeons without having to spend so much time on the mage farming mana because it takes gold instead of mana. So I would primarily be using this attack when I'm fighting mobs and then weave in my attacks that take mana, and I don't think I've had to farm MP in any dungeon since pretty much the start of the game with the demo where I didn't have the merchant unlocked. I think this is one of the strongest abilities in the game to inherit, and a lot of people you'll see recommend just running 4 merchant and spamming gold attack and then kind of benefiting off of the other different passives they have available. And so this is definitely something that I'd recommend inheriting if you're not just going to run merchant on the character. Now, the next few recommended abilities to inherit are going to come from the Faker lineage. And so we're going to start with skill number 2, and that's going to be Faker's Roguery. Now, you see the 86 mana cost, but just bear with me while I explain this. This is going to have the chance to inflict forget on an enemy, but the main reason you're going to use this ability is you're going to have a chance to add or remove turn icons at random. So when you see mobs doing, I think it's the Soul Scream, where they're just instantly generating a bunch of extra turns, this is our version of that. Now, this is a massive mana consumption, so I really only use this skill at the end of dungeons where I was going up against the boss at the beginning of the match, so I can just start from the beginning and cheese it that way if I didn't get the extra turns, or if I'm about to die and I maybe need a last minute Hail Mary, I would just let this off. And there have been so many times where I would just get the 2 turn icons and it would really save me from what would have probably been a wipe. Now, the third skill that I'm going to recommend you inherit, also from the Faker, is going to be Dikaja. This is going to allow you to remove all buff effects from all enemies, and this is going to be crucial once you start to get to the mid and late game. I cannot harp on this enough. Most of the bosses that you're going to fight in the later portions of the game are going to be buffing themselves with rank 3 attack and defense, or sometimes rank 3 attack, defense, and agility, which is just going to make actually hitting them difficult. So you're going to be missing those turn icons because you missed, and when you actually do attack, you're going to be doing a lot less damage. So I had a character that was pretty much a Swiss Army knife, and I believe it was my knight character, which was my tank and my Swiss Army knife, where I inherited a lot of these abilities that are similar to this typing to make her, and it was my Hulkenberg who was my knight, my Swiss Army knife. And so anytime they did it, I would just immediately clear it off so I can continue doing my damage in the way that I needed to without risk of losing those turn icons. And then sometimes they always try and put it back on the next turn. So instead of them attacking me twice, they would, waste 1 turn icon to reapply the buff, and then I would only get attacked with that final turn icon that they had. So using this allowed me to cheese the boss and dish out my damage the way that I needed to. Now, the fourth ability I recommend you inherit, also from the Faker archetype, is going to be the Makarakarn. If you know how to pronounce this, put it in the comments, because I don't. Now, what this is going to do is it's going to raise a barrier that repels 1 elemental attack for 1 ally. Now, the way that I would use this ability is primarily if I knew the boss was going to do an AoE elemental attack, I would just apply this barrier to one of my teammates, whoever was the weakest, or if they maybe had a weakness to that element, I would apply it to them. And when they did that AoE attack, this block or repel would cause them to lose that additional turn icon because an attack was either dodged, blocked, or repelled. And now with some of these bosses, their attack patterns, we know what they're going to do. And if it's AoE, it's pretty much guaranteeing that it's going to hit that ally with this shield enacted to it. And then the second use case would just be if you have someone in your party that's, let's say the Faker, it's weak to wind. I know that the boss is going to do wind-based damage, but I don't necessarily want to swap out that character with another archetype or another unit. I can just keep applying this to them, so that way they're not able to exploit that weakness. Now the fifth skill that I'm going to recommend you inherit is going to come from the Magic Knight archetype, and that's going to be the ability Tetrakarn. This one's easier to pronounce, Tetrakarn. And this is going to be in the same vein that I just explained with the Faker, except it's just going to be for slash, pierce, and strike damage. Same concept, I'm not going to explain it again, but if I know they're doing AoEs, boom. Get this equipped, they're going to attack, repel, -2 turn icons, profit. Now, if you haven't already, I really would appreciate it if you help me get this video to 100 likes and consider subscribing to the channel. I have tons of helpful Metaphor Refantazio guides on the channel, and if you subscribe, you're not going to miss the ones that are coming in the future. But now that you've taken care of that, let's get back into discussing the video. Recommendation number 6 to inherit is going to come from the Commander archetype, and the ability is going to be Formation of Vigor. Now, this is going to move all allies to the front row and increase their attack by 2 ranks for 3 turns. So instead of having to apply it one by one to increase the rank of the attack and having to do it 3 times, you only have to do this skill twice, and you're going to have the entire party with max rank 3 attack. And then when you need to reapply it to keep the buff up, you just have to continuously use this skill. So I think this is a very strong tool to have in your arsenal, so that way you can quickly get those characters to maxed out attack and keep it up. And now in the opposite of that, and this is not one that I'm recommending, I'm just really pointing it out, on the second evolution in the Commander lineage, you have the opposite effect Shelter Formation, where you're going to move all allies to the back row and increase their defense by 2 ranks. Now, if you're playing on normal, this is probably something you're not going to need, but once you start playing on hard or get to New Game Plus, I can really see this skill being something strong and something that you'd really want to have in your arsenal to keep those bosses from hitting as strong as they do. The 7th skill that I'm going to recommend you inherit is going to come from the Knight archetype. If you're running any tanky character, you're going to want to have this inherited on them, but chances are if you're running a tank, it's going to be from the Knight lineage anyways. But this is going to essentially be a taunt, which is going to draw enemy attention and take attacks for all allies for 1 turn. Now, this skill is extremely powerful because I've seen times where I was fighting a boss and normally it would do an AoE attack, but if I had this skill popped, it would start, I don't know if it would like change or if it would just have a higher chance, but I found instead of doing that AoE attack, it would be doing single target attacks more and attacking my Hulkenberg, which is who I had this equipped to, instead of popping that AoE that'll attack the whole party. Now, they do say in the skill certain attacks defy this, so there were times where that didn't happen, but that was kind of the behavior I saw with this, is that if I pop this, it almost guaranteed there will be my Hulkenberg tanking the grunt of the damage. But this is probably going to be something you're not really going to have to inherit because it's going to be on the Knight anyways, and they have several different abilities on here that are going to allow you to tank damage easier. So I think this is a very strong skill to finesse out bosses, and something that I feel like is going to be a must. Having a tank on your team, I feel like is going to be a must on hard or when you're getting on New Game Plus because of this specific ability. And then like once we get to that 3rd iteration or the 3rd evolution of this lineage, you're going to be able to guard and draw enemy attention with Holy Knight's Proclamation. Skills 8 and 9 are going to come from the Healer archetype, but for skill number 8, we're going to go ahead and start with Patra. Now, this is going to cure status elements for 1 ally, and I know that the argument can be made if you have the items in stock, you don't necessarily need to have this skill inherited. But going into a dungeon, if you're not taking advantage of the informant, you may not necessarily have enough of that item to get you through the entire dungeon. And when you start getting to the late game, there are going to be bosses that are doing AoE debuffs, and they're starting to inflict more elements that are going to be AoE elements that a lot of your party is going to be inflicted with, and you may not be able to keep up with it just with your items alone. And having this in your arsenal could save you, especially if you don't know what's coming before you enter the dungeon. Now for skill number 9, I'm going to recommend Dakunda. And I just mentioned it, I also mentioned it earlier in the video, in mid or late game, they're going to start applying AoE debuffs and AoE buffs. Using Dakunda is going to allow you to remove all of those debuffs from all of the allies on your team. So when they're raising their agility 3 ranks and decreasing your accuracy 3 ranks, and you have a super high chance of missing and losing out on those turn icons, as long as you have Dakunda from the healer archetype and Dakaja, I believe it's what it's called, from the faker archetype, you're going to be able to cleanse all of those off and continue to proceed as normal and not have to suffer from those effects. Now the 10th and final skill that I'm going to recommend you guys inherit is going to come from the mage archetype, and that's going to be magic font. Now once you get later into the game, using the abilities are going to cost a lot more mana than just what it starts out with, which is 4 MP, and you're going to need a bigger mana pool. Now the argument can be made that you can just use magic recovery, which is going to give you 1 mana for every mob that you defeat in the overworld or stun, but it's extremely time consuming. And when we have reservation pools like on my main character, which is 431, and this is just not even a mage-based character, I have him built for strength, that's a massive amount of mana that you're going to spend a lot of time wasted to try and get to max recovery. Now, when you use this in tandem with, the merchant ability where you're just using gold to attack, you can make sure that your mana is always stocked up because you're going to have more. Now, this isn't something I put on every single character. It is a passive ability, so you don't have to activate it. It's just automatically in effect. I didn't put it on every character, but I did put it on some of my casters like Yufa and Juna. With Juna, I think I want to say I spec'd into the mage archetype to begin with, so that way I can use her to take advantage and exploit weaknesses. So I already had that anyways, that I could just equip as a passive ability because I'd already invested in her. Now, like I said, I wouldn't recommend leveling and investing in this archetype just for this specific passive, but if you've done it already, you have the open slots, it makes sense to just slap it on there to increase that mana pool reservation. These are my top 10 skills that you need to inherit ASAP, but if you want to hear more tips and tricks from me, check out this video right here where I go into 15 hidden tips that the game doesn't teach you. Thank you for your time, and I'll catch you in the next one.